Welcome to the Radical Responsibility Revolution podcast. This is where we are transforming lives, inspiring you to reclaim your health, your wealth, and the power of your mind. Here we share actionable insights, inviting you to turn inwards and design your life of purpose and abundance. Welcome back to another special episode of Radical Responsibility Revolution. And today I wanted to get some facts straight because apparently the big conversation is the price of beef. When I was growing up, there was I think it was Wendy's, have this commercial says, "Where's the beef?" I want to get some facts straight because what I believe is this whole thing with the press and everybody that talks about so many things, it's so much clickbait out there. So, welcome back, my gorgeous warriors of wisdom, to another episode. And this is a special episode just for today. I'm a little bit fired up because nobody's talking about the truth. And so, let's talk about that today. On this podcast, we take the headlines, ring out the fair, sprinkle in some frequency, tell you the truth that nobody else wants to say out loud. I'm not special. All I do is go look things up, honestly. Today we are talking about beef. Yes, beef. Where's the beef? This is so hilarious. This has become a very sacred American protein. And y'all know I live in Texas. So it's a big deal here. I remember, oh gosh, how many years ago? It feels like 20 years ago. Oprah got sued by Texas beef farmers because it's so sacred here. It's the symbol of Sunday dinners, summertime grilling, and that one time your ex promised to take you to a fancy steakhouse and then used a coupon. I mean, we all have experience around beef. Unless you've been living under a rock or eating tofu against your will, you probably noticed or heard, since I don't really eat beef, you've noticed that beef prices have been insane. And I want to share with you a little bit about that because there's been a little bit of a finger pointing episode going on with why these beef prices are so high. So we're going to talk about that. I remember as a kid growing up, my parents would buy a half of a side of beef and they came and they butchered it and they put it in the freezer. And that's what we lived on for basically the whole year because a side of beef can feed a family of four. Pretty darn good. So maybe somebody wants to think about that. And that's not what I'm here to talk about today. I want to talk about these beef prices from the perspective that everyone is pointing fingers. Oh, it's corporate greed. It's climate, and that's a big one. It's climate change. It's Trump's tariffs. Frankly, they might as well just say it's the Illuminati because honestly, it's not any of that. Stop. Take a breath. Let Abuela Debbie walk you through what's actually going on. Because this story, this real story, is so much bigger and so much longer in the making and absolutely not what you're hearing on the news. This is what's blowing my mind. The news is not news anymore. It's just editorials dressed up in some other kind of disguise that you believe. And so I wanted to really get down to the nitty gritty about why this is happening. Not that that's really going to change your pain point, I suppose, but that's why I teach about abundance. So that's a different conversation. And this whole idea of affordability, that's what I talk about in my abundance courses. I'm starting this 40-day prosperity challenge starting this Friday. So you might want to check that out and sign up for that. The information is in the show notes. Let's talk about beef. Beef prices didn't just, they've been marching up for years. Literally, there's been this slow march of why these beef prices are where they are right now. I was doing some research on this and there was a article by the beef industry itself from July of 2024. So that's a year and a few months ago. And this is what they reported in that article in July of 2024. The headline was beef hits a record $8.15 a pound. Well, that sounds really dramatic. And here's the thing is that I then researched and I put into Google what is the average price of beef
per pound right now, and it's $8.25 a pound. So 10-cent difference. The USDA gave that statistic about $8.15 a pound. That's beef overall, all cuts is averaged an $8.15 a pound, July of 2024. What? That's crazy. If it's only $8.25 now, that makes a little bit of interesting conversation. And what's interesting, more importantly, is that the beef industry said this. That was the headline. Beef hits a record $8.15 a pound, July of 2024, a year plus ago. This wasn't a surprise, though. This is the thing. The article goes on to talk about why the beef hit that all time high. This was the culmination of multiple years of, and this is what's really important, is that this is not something that just showed up, as some people would like to say, under the Trump administration. Honestly, it was during the Biden administration, and I'm not sure that he could have controlled any of these things, particularly what happened, but this is the issue that's being left to the current administration to address. This is the culmination of these things. Number one, we had herd shrinkage. You've heard of the word shrinkage, right? So we have herds of cattle. 85% of the US beef comes from locally in the United States. So the herd shrank. Why? Why did the herd shrink? We have had droughts in areas, and I live in Texas. So I've lived through those droughts. What literally it was 2-3 years ago. This drought was so severe that it was really taking a toll on the north part of Texas, where we have a lot of cattle being raised. This drought caused the herds to shrink by virtue of the fact that the farmers started selling off the herd so they didn't have to feed them because they couldn't graze. So they had to feed them. They had to bring in the feed, which that then rises the cost of feeding the cows. Then what happens is these processing plants, which apparently there's only 4 of them in the whole of the United States, they started having bottlenecks. Then there were export pressures. The ranchers began losing money while the grocery store prices went up. Why? Because of the processing plants. So if your grocery bill felt like a crime scene, it's because it was. But I want to just remind you again, this all started happening almost 3 years ago. And the criminal wasn't a politician. It was the system that we operate in. So if you think about the whole entire system of how it works, from the cattle ranchers to the processing plants, and sometimes these processing plants are so far away from the actual cattle ranches that it's criminal. So the alarm bells, the red flags were already going up, boom, 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 by the beef industry, July of 2024. It hit a record back then. And it wasn't because of tariffs, and it wasn't because of politics. Now, I talk about all the time supply and demand, supply and demand. That's how the economy works. The supply chain for cattle, which gives us beef, was limping like a one-legged cow wearing stilettos. This is the problem. When we don't have enough of something and there's a very high demand, guess what? The price goes up. So keep in mind, though, the average price per pound of beef in 2024, July, was $8.15. Now, I heard a guy recently come on some news program and say, well, y'all better get ready for $10 a pound for ground beef. Okay, so that's the new reality, apparently. So I kept thinking, well, this doesn't, I'm listening to the freaking headlines and they don't make any sense. And that's why I research everything. So when I read the article from July of 2024, day before yesterday, I thought, okay, well, let me put into, because everybody's making a big deal out of it. The press wants to get a headline out of it, either side you're on. And I thought, well, okay, so if it was $8.15 in July of 2024, let me put in, what is the average price of beef right now, today, October 25. And it comes up $8.25. Now, I don't know about you, but my brain went, okay, everybody's so excited about this beef price, and yet it's only 10 cents more than what it was a year and a few months ago. That's not a big jump, right? I mean, there's a percentage involved. It's 0.10%, but so this is where people get confused. And I think, I personally went, well, okay, prices are stabilizing. They're not crazy out of control, given the fact that all of the things that I read in that article, right, that we are coming back to a normal place, but we're not. Because here is the thing, it takes a long time for a cow to grow. So I remember back in the beginning of the year when the big hoop-de-loop was on chickens and eggs because we had a shortage of chickens. Just say, whenever you have a shortage of something, this causes a problem. When we have a shortage of something, it actually causes prices to go higher because there isn't enough of what people want. So I'm thinking, well, we fixed the chicken problem. What about this cow problem? Well, the cow problem is a little bit harder because you imagine the life of a chicken is not anywhere near what the life of a cow is. And prices can't stabilize until we work through some of the issues. So we look backwards and I think, okay, we had that problem in July of 2024. The USDA and the beef industry was sounding the alarm. They were sounding the alarm because we had a drought. The farmers were selling off their herds because they were even selling female cows because they needed to get the prices for their herds. So they were downsizing their herds. And what was happening is they were shrinking the inventory. Now, one of the things is it's also interesting to note that we have 85% of the beef we use comes from our country. Let's say 15 to 20% gets imported. Where does most of the imports come from? Well, if you don't know the answer, it's Mexico. The majority of it comes from Mexico. Some of it comes from Canada. Well, then all of a sudden, there's a screwworm problem. So, November of 2024, the federal government stopped allowing beef to be imported from Mexico. So, I want you to keep in mind that all of this havoc started during the previous administration. The red flags were there. The importing of beef shutdown happened in November 24 during Biden. So, I get a little testy when I hear Trump caused all of this. Okay, my darling, my darling, my darling, my darling. No, no, no. This is not something that Trump caused. This is something that should have been corrected, and now it's left in his lap to fix. Because if you look at this scenario that I shared with you, the average price has barely moved from $8.15 to $8.25. But the reason that we might have $10 a pound ground beef is because this $8.15 and $8.25 is the overall average of all the beef. So what happens is that ground beef is mostly imported from Mexico. Remember, I just told you that was cut off. So now we also have a shortage because we can't import. The Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, corrected that. But here's the thing is that because we're taking all of this average, and so ground beef, yes, is up. Totally, right? Steaks and roasts are actually also up because those are higher versions of cuts. But this inflation, if you will, of the beef, people think these numbers would explode the overall average. Well, because a cow is more than one cut, right? It's not. And as I said, the ground beef doesn't even come from the cows that we're producing. They don't. The average is all of the numbers. So the all fresh beef price is weighted, if you will, it's averaged. You can't just average the three cuts that you care about, which I know we all love certain cuts. Well, I don't really care, but I know you people that eat beef really love that. I'm a chicken and fish girl. You have to average literally dozens of cuts, trimmings, and purchases and factor in what consumers shift toward when prices rise. So here's the thing, is that the overall beef price, $8.15 in July of 24, $8.25 October of 25. That's what's happening. So people are buying cheaper cuts. Well, duh, because beef is expensive, but it's also changing the actual numbers. The weighted average rises slower because of all these cuts. So some cuts actually are stabilizing while others are spiking, and the average smooths itself out. And I don't know why, but economists love a weighted average. It's the curve, the grading curve, like when you're in school. And frankly, consumers hate it. And here's the bigger problem. Politicians absolutely exploit it. Because here's the thing, is it doesn't make headlines if they share, even the press that should be reporting accurately doesn't want to share all of this with you. It would rather just give you a headline, give you a bullet point, and scare the out of you. Now that's not doesn't work for me. Because here's that bombshell that I was talking about, that screw worm. And just like the bird flu, people aren't talking about this. This is such a problem. Trump is now changing the trajectory of beef coming from Brazil by reducing the tariffs because he's just trying to fix the problem. This problem just didn't start yesterday. It started over 3 years ago. And this is the part that nobody is talking about. Not CNN, not Fox, not MSNBC, not even the food reporters. So check this out. In November of 2024, under Biden, the United States, as I said, halted beef imports from Mexico because of this screwworm outbreak. They said, no, we can't let them in because they're going to infect our cows and cause problems for our community. It's not a conspiracy. It's not political. It's literally a parasite. Although, I don't know. I might want to think about, was it a conspiracy? I don't know. I haven't seen a screwworm. It's not cute. It's not a Pixar character, apparently. It's a fly larvae that burrows into warm blooded animals and eats their flesh. Well, that's disgusting, right? Yes. Economically destructive is what it ended up being. That is the absolute truth. Now, because Mexico is a major supplier of feeder cattle and processed beef, so keep in mind, processed beef, that ends up being the ground beef. So, why would ground beef cost more than steak? Well, this is part of the reason why. Because when you shut down the imports, hello, guess what happens? The supply shrank even more. Feedlots struggled, the processors scrambled like eggs, no pun intended, and prices kept pressure upward. This is what we call a real supply chain crisis, not a political talking point. That is the issue. And who reopened the imports? Da-da, as I said, Agriculture Secretary Brooke Wallens. She did this quietly, though. This is what's so interesting, is that you all want to hear all the headlines and make hay out of it, but she did this while you all were sleeping, quietly, effectively, without drama, without blaming anyone, because that's how you know it's real leadership. She got it open by February or March of 2025 to let the cattle start being imported from Mexico again. And I know everybody's in this hullabaloo about tariffs, etc. That's the thing, is that when you have a shortage, just like we did with the eggs and the chickens, that shortage ripples through the system for months. But she did it. She took care of the egg crisis, and now she's working on this beef crisis. Because you see, supply chains don't just snap back like your favorite pair of yoga pants. They take time. And when you're talking about something like beef, that it takes them years to grow, then we have a particularly severe supply chain issue. So, why are we still suffering even when the prices are at record highs? So, let's talk about the farmers because this is the heart of the issue. The consumers are thinking beef is $8 a pound. The ranchers must be getting rich. No, no, no. This is the thing, is that if we don't begin to pay attention to how money works, how business works, how supply chains work, how supply and demand work, you will always think the worst of somebody else and worry about your own lack and your own poverty mindset. This is why I teach abundance, is we have to get out of that finger pointing, blame game, I hate you, you're my enemy mentality. Because my love, this is not about ranchers being rich. This is not about the government doing something that is causing this inflation. This has nothing to do with tariffs. These poor farmers are drowning. And this is the thing that I love about Brooke Rollins, is that she understands that. Here's the thing that they are dealing with. So let's go back into our empathetic beingness and say, oh my gosh, how are those poor ranchers dealing with life? Because the feed costs are still super high. Feed costs got hit by inflation, just like every other thing that you all buy. The input costs increased. The processing capacity is completely effed up, right? It is so terrible right now. And that needs to be fixed, which I know that they're working on. And the packers and the retailers take the majority of the margin. This is not helping our ranchers. And the other really severe thing that I keep saying in this podcast is herd rebuilding takes years. It takes years. And many ranchers culled too much during that drought. So they had to do something with their herds. They couldn't feed them because they couldn't afford to feed them. So unfortunately, they sent them to the slaughterhouse and they diminished their inventory. So even with these record prices, this is where the problem comes. The farmers are actually getting less of every dollar. Have you noticed that that's working in your situation too? You feel like you're working harder than ever and you're getting paid less. We're working on creating more affordability, which I hate that word. And it's all about this frequency that you are living in, that you feel this lack and poverty feeling, and it's not going to help. Farmers' risk is higher than it ever has been because we've got all these regulations and their margins are thinner. So if you don't know what a margin is, it's the difference between what you have to pay to create something and how much you get paid when you sell it. And when it's that razor thin, you're not really making money. And that is why beef prices have risen over this period of time, over these 3 to 4 years, not because of tariffs or political theater, but because America's cattle infrastructure has been strained, I say, for almost a decade. So let's talk about the media. Ugh, my favorite topic. The media keeps blaming the wrong things. And this is where Grandmama Debbie gets spicy. Because the media loves easy villains. It's so easy to point, 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 point. It's like bing, 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 like little kids playing cowboys and Indians. Bing. So the media loves these easy villains. The easy villains are tariffs, orange man bad, greedy corporations. Oh, and my favorite, climate change. Billionaires plotting in their bunkers. Oh my gosh, none of that is what has caused this problem, because the real causes, they're freaking boring and they don't make headlines. So here's the real causes, the drought patterns. And you can call that climate change or not, but here's the thing. I've lived in Texas long enough and watched the history. That's what happens here. God, can you remember the Dust Bowl? We read about it in history books. What was that, the 1920s, 30s, 40s? This is not climate change. These are drought patterns. This is the other culprit, is the herd cycles and the forage shortages. So there's no place for them to go and forage. This cross-border disease that we talked about with the screwworm. The feed prices, those feed prices, not only did we suffer inflation, the farmers did when they were feeding their cows. This is a big problem to really start to put together. That inflation had tentacles that went everywhere. Then we also have the culprit of the supply chain bottlenecks, the market consolidation. I find this to be one of the most offensive issues that came up was all of our processed beef goes through 4 locations. That needs to stop. And then the consumer mix shifts. But you know what? Boring doesn't get clicks. Instead, we get these silly narratives that aren't true. And then you all jump on the bandwagon. How do we come to a resolution and solution to what we find ourselves in with respect to a circumstance, a reality that we're not going to argue with reality. I'm not going to argue with the fact that there was a drought. I'm not going to argue with the fact that we lived through inflation. I'm not going to argue with the fact that we have not enough processing plants. It's time to be in solution and move towards that. And then maybe you just look at how do you be more like we used to be when I was growing up? How do you be more frugal with what you do have during this period of transition? I remember we had coupons. As I said, as a kid, we bought a side of beef, put it in the freezer. Everybody can do that. So you're going to get a way bigger price break on a side of beef than you are about buying individual cuts in a supermarket. Just saying, there's some alternatives out there. Let's just dial this in. Beef inflation wasn't caused by Trump, or it's hurting me to say this, Biden, because here's the thing is it wasn't caused by Biden, but Biden had an opportunity because like I said, all the red flags were there. But it also wasn't caused by tariffs. One policy. It's caused by years of structural issues finally colliding. It was that perfect storm again, just like the unicorn years were with COVID. So here is the bottom line is we want to begin to stop blaming people and identify how we can come up with resolution and solutions. And here's what I'm beginning to see about the culture at large. People hate when something doesn't have a simple villain. Y'all want a villain. This is not Game of Thrones. This is not. Trump's tariffs aren't the bad guy here. That's what I really want to be clear about because this is where panic starts. People start going down a trajectory and it's mob mentality and it's crazy. Tariffs can affect some imported goods. Absolutely. That is one thing that we've noticed, that there are certain things that we don't produce here. So he's not only lowering tariffs on beef because we have a supply chain issue, but he's lowering it on things like bananas and coffee because those are things that we don't produce in this country. But the US beef system is overwhelmingly domestic. And it's time that we begin to realize that all roads and finger pointing do not go to Donald Trump or the policies. These things do not happen in a vacuum. And think about this. 99% of all fresh retail beef comes from US cattle, US processors, and US feedlots. So when we have the problems that we've had, it's really challenging to fill in these gaps. And Trump's tariffs, they are not the cause of beef inflation, which is one of the highest cost of living things that we have going on right now. It's not even in the top 10 causes. And if someone wants to argue this, go ahead, write your comments. But I'm going to say, if tariffs caused record beef inflation, why was beef already breaking records in July of 2024 before Trump even returned to office? Boom. Mic drop. So what does this mean for you? Let's shift it to the spiritual because this is where we go deeper. This is where my whole philosophy is and what I teach. Radical responsibility is understanding the systems you live inside, not that they control you, so that you understand how to navigate and how to hold your consciousness and how to hold your frequency and your energy. And it certainly is not paying attention to headlines or narratives or these social media tantrums. Because if you don't understand food systems, you're going to be manipulated by people who profit from your fear. So here's my invitation to you. Understand the world that you live in. Learn cycles of nature. Beef is cyclical, just like a whole lot of other things. It will get better, and then it will get harder, and then it will get better again. That's just life. That's nature. Understand supply and demand, because this is something that if you do not understand, you think that you're at the mercy of the supply and the demand quotient. What happens when you understand this? It empowers you. It frees you and it removes blame. Stop blaming your circumstances on somebody else. Radical responsibility. And you can support local ranchers because they are the heart of America's food security. So when you do that, you take charge of your own lifestyle. Take your emotional frequency out of the fear machine. Take it out. You cannot, I repeat, cannot manifest abundance if you're vibrating at Fox News or CNN levels of cortisol. You can't. It's not going to happen. Turn it off. And finally, recognize the truth. Most crises are slow moving structural issues, not political demons. I don't care how many times they want to try to spin it that way. Radical responsibility is saying, I refuse to be manipulated. I choose clarity. I choose freedom and independence. I choose freedom, freedom, freedom. And that includes what's on your dinner plate. So once again, I want to thank you for being here, for caring about truth, and for choosing to think beyond headlines. Beef prices are not a mystery. They're a mirror that is showing us how systems work, how narratives are being weaponized, and most of all, how fear is manufactured. Don't be one of those people that are misled easily, just following a headline. Because you, my magical, lovely, independent, abundant listener, are here because you're done being misled. And if today's episode opened your eyes, boom, share it with someone who needs real clarity, not the media circus. And remember, radical responsibility plus frequency equals freedom. I'll see you for another truth bomb filled episode. Queen of Magic out.